Donald Trump has spent much of the last few days on his ridiculously named social media platform, Truth Social, posting about his possible indictment and slamming the media, the prosecutors, and the rest. But he took a break from that, briefly today to attack someone else, a Republican, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, suggesting the governor could at some point face false accusations of grooming, among other disgusting insinuations and homophobic smears. Why did he lash out at DeSantis? Because this morning the Florida governor broke his silence on a possible Trump indictment at a press conference, and DeSantis said this.
I don't know what goes into paying hush money to a porn star to secure silence over some type of alleged affair. I can't speak to that. They ignore crime and they empower criminals, and that hurts people, hurts a lot of people every single day. The Soros district attorneys are a menace to society.
Back with us tonight, former Democratic New York Congressman Max Rose and Mike Murphy, veteran Republican strategist and co-director of the Center for the Political Future at the University of Southern California. He's also co-host of the Hacks on Tap podcast. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Max Rose, let me start with you. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis basically sidestepping, defending Trump, pivoting to attacking Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. He called him a, quote, Soros-funded prosecutor. George Soros, a Jewish billionaire, is apparently behind the plot to indict Trump. I know what that sounds like to me. What does that sound like to you?
You know, DeSantis right now is playing this awfully weird game, and I don't think it's sustainable by any sense of the word. In the same sentence, he tries to rightfully hit Donald Trump for the egregious actions that he took, which have led to this indictment, and at the same time decides to hit Alvin Bragg for somehow being this nefarious, Soros-backed DA who's acting against the rule of law. And this is why, I think we're going to progressively see Ron DeSantis slipping in the polls. It's awfully easy for him to have his cake and eat it too when he's not in the race and he just wants to be this governor with a good pedigree who can wage war on the woke left or something to that effect. But he's playing in the mud now with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump likes it. And Ron DeSantis doesn't appear to actually know what he is doing. And I think it's actually going to leave an enormous lane open for another Republican in the primary who can actually be true to themselves and potentially try to take the lane of the anti-Trumpers, which are perhaps still the majority in the Republican primary. We don't know. We have no idea. But Ron DeSantis is acting like a fool.
So, on that note, Mike, has DeSantis, who Max calls acting like a fool, has he learned nothing from Jeb Bush's experience in 2016? Avoiding a direct confrontation with Trump doesn't stop Trump's attacks. Staying above the fray in a contest with Trump doesn't work.
Well, I disagree with your premise. Jeb took Trump on harder than anybody, but ironically, Lindsey Graham, who was briefly a candidate before his conversion. I think the bigger lesson for DeSantis is you can't beat Trump by being a dime store version of Donald Trump. DeSantis' early rise, and it's far too early to really know. I'm with Max. Watch another non-Trump candidate to appear later in the process. But DeSantis was kind of a proof of concept that people were willing to move beyond Trump. I believe that's still true. The Trump people know in our polarized society, our polarized politics, they can try to whip up tribalism over this, and they're trying to pull DeSantis into that briar patch. What DeSantis tried to do was use a little Republican code speak. The Soros thing is really about, there are a bunch of progressive DAs now. That is a thing in Republican-based primary circles. And so he's trying to link it all together without really attacking Trump. It's a little too clever by half, and I don't think it'll bode particularly well for him, but he's still not Trump. He's still leader of a megastate, so I think he's still in the race.
The Soros stuff is also an anti-Semitic dog whistle. Let's call it what it is. Congressman Max Rose, McCarthy told an NBC reporter, quote, "I don't think people should protest this. No, nobody should harm one another. We want calmness out there." I wonder, is McCarthy's statement there a kind of implicit admission that he knows Trump is calling for non-peaceful protests. He knows that a lot of Trump hardcore supporters are prone to violence. That's why he's saying that.
How nice of the speaker to say that there should not be violence in the streets merely a day after he came out and said that the actions of a prosecutor at the local level are absolutely egregious and clearly a sign that government has overtaken the judicial process. And then 5 minutes later, he moves on to talk about the need for a committee on the weaponization of government. So they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. And this is just this odd, disgusting power of Donald Trump to suck people back into his vortex. You know, the fact that right now the speaker and all of his minions are coming to the aid of Donald Trump, when it is clearly obvious that Donald Trump paid hush money to a porn star to cover up an affair and did so in an illegal manner, only speaks to, what is right now just the baseless absence of any intellectual, ethical, or moral foundation on the part of the Republican Party right now. And I think this is only just the beginning of this story in this presidential election.
So let's keep talking about this presidential election, because Trump is not just a former president. He's the front runner in the GOP presidential race right now. Mike, if you were advising Pompeo or Haley or Pence or this hypothetical non-Trump alternative that might come later down the track, what would you say they should be saying right now, tonight?
I think they should be saying it's time to move beyond Donald Trump, let the legal system sort it out. The problem is the Democrats, by no choice, just by happenstance, they're leading with their weakest case. That is a gift to Trump. Accounting misdemeanors. And he is a Democratic elected prosecutor from a Democratic state or city, very Democratic city. So it's easy for the Republican primary voter street talk to be, wait a minute, even though I want to move beyond Trump, they're going after him for accounting because he paid off a porn star. Anybody indict Bill Clinton for his sex scandal? It doesn't have the power of Georgia, where he tried to steal the election by leaning on the Republican Secretary of State or the special counsel. So, what you want to do if you're running post-Trump is not be a Trump surrogate, but wait for the main course, not this appetizer, which is the lightest and weakest of the charges against Trump. And it's a hard thing to do, but you want to be ready to be the Labor Day surge candidate when DeSantis fails the second look and the same Trump fatigue that's got him down to a third of the primary at most is still there later in the year. So you're punting for time here.
I don't disagree with you on the kind of the weakness of the case relative to Fulton County, but I am amused at the way Republicans have come out strongly with it's bookkeeping. It's an accounting error for a Christian conservative base that supposedly doesn't like adultery and porn stars. But anyway.